and the mark of the beast and the image of the beast. Now, y'all know the things that we believe here. We believe that the beast has been here since the Garden of Eden. Who was the beast? Huh? Who was he?
Satan.
Satan, yeah. And he had an image, didn't he? Now, he didn't have a statue. He had an image, huh? He had an... That's right, Eve. Eve was his image. Because image in the Greek is E-I-K-O-N, icon. We think of an icon, we say Michael Jordan is an icon of our society, or Elvis Presley was an icon. That means that they were a tremendous representation of our society is what it means. And we say I-C-O-N, but the word icon, and we're going to show that the image of the beast is a female by this chart on the top up here. And this eliminates a lot of people, what a lot of people think about what the beast is. Let's go back over to the book of Genesis and let's look at the original beast and the original image and what they did. They had two powers. They had two powers, or they had two horns. Now, horn always showed power. And what they did, they executed two powers. Now, the Lord tells, in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, the Lord tells Adam, in verse 16, the Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. He had a garden, and you're talking about image, or you're talking about mark. Now, the mark of the beast was in the garden, because the word mark is the word C-H-A-R-A-G-M-A, and it comes from the word C-H-A-R-A-X. I believe it is. I'll look at it in a minute, make sure. But that word karax, and the word karagna means an etching, or it had to do with the foreheads of the slaves. Always a slave or a prostitute wore upon their forehead it was a band that showed who owned them and whose authority that they bowed unto. Sometimes they would take a slave and he would put his ear on the doorpost of the house and they'd bore his ear through with an awl to show who he belonged to, who owned him, and whose law or authority he was obedient to. You remember over there in the 6th chapter of Romans, the scripture says that to whom you yield yourself service to obey his servants, you are to whom you obey. Well, every time you see the harlot with on her forehead a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. She belonged to Babylon. Babylon and Catholicism is Babylonian. Now America is Catholic without being Roman Catholic. We're not necessarily, I believe the Baptists and the Presbyterians, and when I say this, I'm not saying this in anger. We know what Catholicism was started on. In about 324 AD, when Constantine ascended the thrones of all the world empire of Rome, he issued what was called an Edict of Toleration. And first thing he did, he put the sun god behind the heads of the saints, and we call it a halo now. And he wanted to conciliate the heathen, to cause the heathen to turn and to look to the saints of the Christianity. Well, this was to cause the Christians and the heathens to come together into one group and to tolerate one another. Now, the Bible doesn't teach tolerance of sin. We don't even teach church discipline anymore. When the Scripture says that we're to withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly, we're not to have fellowship with unfruitful works of darkness in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, and that we're not even to bid a man Godspeed if he comes bringing any other doctrine. And the word Godspeed there in 2 John, Godspeed, when a lot of people, they hate this. Godspeed is the word C-H-A-I-R-O. And that kind of goes along with the word phileo, which is affection. It's the word affection for love. There's two words for the word love, agape. Agape is walking in the commandment of God, 2 John 6. And then whenever we are, and this word caro kind of goes along with phileo, because phileo is the word affection. And when the Scripture says God is love, love your neighbor, love your enemy, it's always agape, walking in the commandment of God, Teach them God's doctrine, and if anybody comes teaching any other doctrine, don't bid them Godspeed. That's the word caro. We get the word, it comes from the word grace, which is the word charis, which means unmerited favor, and the word joy is the word chara, C-H-A-R-I-S, and the word C-H-A-R-A, that's the word joy. We're not to be gracious to them. We're not to be joyous with them, and that word caro means to be cheerful. If anybody comes preaching any other doctrine, you say, are we supposed to hate them? Well, no. But we're to correct men hard and with cutting rebuke when they're rebellious against God's law. And someone comes preaching any other doctrine than God's law, somebody who gets outside, this word corrects, someone who gets outside the corrects the state.